With us now is one of the journalists behind that great profile, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig. So it's great seeing you.
Good to see you.
You know, I was struck, when reading it, which I think everybody should. Jose Ortega y Gasset said, "I am I plus my circumstances."
Right.
And everybody enters life and goes through life being impacted and changed by one's circumstances.
Well, and I always feel as a journalist, to understand somebody, you really have to understand their upbringing and their parents and what got them to where they are. It's so important. And when you think about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and what he went through just even in the first 20 years of his life, it's just a way to sort of understand him. It doesn't justify anything, but there's circumstances that are very important.
What are some of those that you think are more impactful in his life?
Well, I think early on, he went through both the assassination of first his uncle, John F. Kennedy, and then his father when he was running for president in 1968. And he's talked about those circumstances, particularly the assassination of his father, led him to drug abuse. And in his 20s, he was arrested for possession of heroin. He was a heroin addict. He actually has Hep C from using needles. I've talked to him about that. And these are just in the first 25, 26 years of his life. But then what you see is he became an addict, and he went through rehab, and he came out of that, and he says he hasn't used drugs since then. But what you've seen in his life is other extreme behavior that he has cycled through. And I think his addiction runs through his life, not just with drugs, which is obviously important, was very formative, but other addictions and other sort of extreme behavior that he's had. Some of it, people say, have, not only has it been extreme, it's been dangerous when you look at some of the rhetoric that he's espoused about vaccines.
Yeah, many or some in the Kennedy family have had that same experience, had to go through drug addiction, some alcohol
a lot.
addiction.
Yeah.
But in his particular case, how does he go from, being like what you were just mentioning, experiencing those traumas in life and then becoming an environmental lawyer and then, having some would say extremely controversial thoughts and concepts about vaccines? How do you go from those?
That's the million-dollar question, because we do see him. He's a very successful environmental lawyer. He worked on cases with other lawyers that got national headlines. He got a lot of attention for that, but had sort of a track that looked very promising and very successful and not extreme. And then he moves into and almost leaves the environmental career behind him. He still has a law firm that does that with a partner of his, but for the most part, he went kind of headlong into vaccine rhetoric and just talking about the dangers of vaccines. I don't know what the break was and where that happened, but you've seen other extreme things in his life, whether it's he had philandering it broke up his second marriage. In 2010, there was a divorce filing there, and a lot of it was just his extramarital affairs. He actually kept a diary at one point that parts of it became public, but have been reported on. So I don't know where the break was, but he does then cycle in. It's not just the vaccines. I want to make that really clear. He also was saying that AIDS was caused by poppers, these drugs that you can inhale.
No, and he also has separately been very focused on the planet and on, for example, he's gone into the whole thing of food and raw milk and getting chemicals out of, foods.
And some of the things he says, it's interesting, they're logical. I think most people would agree we probably need less additives in our food. But then it veers into this area of really extreme, rhetoric. Yeah.